Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel and to another video. Today's video is one that I've been wanting to make and I've been really excited to make because the story that I'm going to be telling today is the one of my very first heart horse, my childhood pony, Sheik.
Ever since you walked away, nothing ever was the same. Only the thought of yesterday brings back all the pain. You didn't used to be this way. I know that's what you would take.
So Merlin is the first horse that I've sort of bought and paid for and owned all on my own, but he's actually my third horse. So growing up, both my sister and I rode, and the first pony we ever had was a little 12-hand-ish little bay pony mare named Shannon. We had her for about 2.5 years, and then we started looking. And in the summer of 2004, we ended up taking on trial an 11-year-old 14 1.5 hand gray Polish Arabian gelding named Sheik. We would own him for about 7.5 years, and it's his story that I want to tell today because I credit him with sort of making me the rider I am today. So this video is going to have a few different sections. I'm going to tell what we know of his story before we bought him, a little bit about his parents, then I'm going to talk about sort of his story while with us, then I'll go into the lessons he's taught me, and then I'll finish up with talking a little bit about where he is now. So Sheik was bred and raised in Florida. He was by a really well-known Arabian racing stallion named Sam Sheik. When he was sold, Sam Sheik actually ended up being the most expensive Arabian racing stallion at his time when he was sold to one of the princes of Qatar. He spent 4 racing seasons in the US, and I actually managed to find a video on YouTube, a little bit of him racing and then some of him just sort of galloping at liberty.
Oh, I could tell you just the same. What went down for you to change? 'Cause it's been driving me insane.
So Sheik was by Sam Sheik out of a mare named Joris Debonair, who was by another beautiful stallion named Jorah Honeycoo. So Sheik was like a flea-bitten gray. If I look at the pictures that are available of his sort of family tree, Sam Sheik was chestnut, his sire Sambor was chestnut, but his grandsire Jorah Honeycoo is a gray. So I assumed that Sheik's color genetics come from his mom's side. He was bred and raised in Florida, and then as a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old, he actually was a racehorse. So Arabian racing used to be quite a big thing in the States, especially in the South, in Florida where he was raised, but also sort of on the East Coast. So a couple of years ago, I actually managed to find his race record on Equibase, which I had never seen before. So it was really cool, and that was sort of where I learned that he was bred and raised in Florida. We know the name of his jockey, his trainer. Sheik raced in 1997 and 1998, which is crazy to think about because I would have been 1 and 2 years old at that time. He had a total of 7 starts, and he was not a very successful racehorse because his total earnings over the course of his very short and brief career was $4,596, which if you know anything about racing, that's not very much money. He evidently wasn't a very good racehorse, and it's really funny. So if I go onto his race record, he only ever won 1 race, which was his very first race at Tampa Bay Downs in Florida, and then he either must have been sold or the trainer must have moved because the rest of his races for 1997 and 1998 are at Delaware Park. So the story of how we bought him was that after we sold our original pony, we went without owning a horse for, I want to say it was like 1.5 years, and that entire time we were sort of leasing and looking for something that would be suitable for both my sister, who was 6 years older than me, and something that I could eventually grow into. So my coach at the time reached out to a friend that she knew in the States, in Virginia, and asked if he knew of or had anything that sort of fit our criteria. And it was really funny because when we were looking, my mom said that there was 2 things that she didn't want. She didn't want an Arabian and she didn't want a gray horse. And we ended up with a gray Arabian who throughout the years earned the nickname Pigsty because, like many gray horses, he was very, very, very good at finding the wettest, muddiest, dirtiest puddle, rolling and getting himself dirty, especially the morning of or night before a show. So when my coach at the time reached out to this friend, end, he actually said that his wife had a horse that she was selling that might fit the bill. When we originally heard about him, we were told that he was super laid back and that he had done some jumping, had tried his hand at being an endurance horse. He was a little more experienced, also a little more challenging because he was an Arabian, so was quite a lot more high-strung than the ponies that I was used to and the ponies that my sister was used to. We ended up deciding to have him imported from Virginia to come to where I grew up on the East Coast for a month's trial. And we ended up absolutely falling in love with him. I didn't actually ride him that much in the first couple of years that we owned him because, like I said, when we bought him I was 8 and I just wasn't quite up to par with the skill level of riding that he needed. One of my earliest memories of him actually comes from when one of the girls that I was in pony club with was selling her pony. It was during his trial and he was out on turnout in the riding arena during the day, and when the people who were buying my friend's pony showed up with a trailer, he saw the trailer and started freaking out. He was like galloping around the arena, neighing, screaming his head off, and I sort of described the way that he was galloping kind of like Pepe Le Pew from the Looney Tunes, and that I think that was a moment where we sort of realized, okay, he might not necessarily be as laid back as we were under the impression that he was, but over the years that sort of became one of the things that we loved about him. And over the first year and a half that we owned him, my sister did a lot of really cool things with him. She did a cross-country clinic with the man who eventually became the chef d'equipe for Equestrian Canada. She did some other like cross-country show jumping type clinics and local fun shows. And then in the winter from 2005 into 2006, I ended up starting to ride him a little bit. I started taking lunch lessons on him, literally walk trot. I don't even think I cantered. And that winter was definitely a necessary step in my journey towards being able to adequately and competently ride Sheik. So then between the sort of January and summer of 2006, I don't actually have that many memories of what I was doing. I think once we moved back to our home farm, I started riding some of the lesson ponies again and didn't ride Sheik that much, but I definitely started riding him more that summer and into that fall when there were some issues with our barn situation that caused us to move barns and switch trainers. It's sort of very short notice, and ultimately for me to lose a lot of confidence. Like, I don't think I'd always been quite a nervous rider, but I don't think my confidence had ever been that low. And by necessity, because there was no one else for me to ride, I started riding Sheik regularly. We moved from like a pony club situation to a boarding barn, and one of the coaches who came to that farm regularly was nice enough to take us on as clients. So I started taking lessons on him and really learning him as a horse. 2007 was a year that it was sort of up and down in my confidence. I was still very nervous. I have distinct memories of riding with friends, or if I was riding, especially in the winter, when I was more nervous because noises like snow falling off the roof or the arena cracking, stuff like that would cause him to spook. I have distinct memories of asking anyone that I was riding with to stand in the middle of the arena while I cantered, and God bless them, they did. No, it was probably very annoying. In 2007, I did my first shows on him. My first show on him being this winter fun show that one of the local boarding barns was hosting, and I think it was February. I did the walk trot class. We were 2 or 3 and I came second, but he was such a good boy that day, and I had never ridden him off property, like properly off property. It really sort of gave me confidence to keep going. So by the early summer at some of the local shows, I did some novice flat classes, walk trot canter, and then by the end of the summer, I was jumping him more, and at the very last show of the season, which was in August, I did the X's Nose jumping class, which is basically like a mix of cross rails and verticals. And then 2008 came, and it was definitely a year that both gave a lot, but also took a lot. This was the year that I gained my confidence. As I grew older, I started to realize that I could sit the spooks and that he spooked more when I reacted. So I started trying to actively calm myself down and not react to the things that I previously would have flinched at. I went into the spring jumping small courses of verticals, and I signed up for the 2-3 class at a clinic that was happening with a really well-respected and higher level clinician. The only issue with that was that I was the only one who signed up for the 2'3" class, so there wasn't enough to fill the class. So if I wanted to ride in the clinic, the only class that there was room for me to ride in was in the 2'9" class. I think the highest I had jumped with Sheik at home was 2'6" in a gymnastic. It ended up being one of the best best things that could have ever happened to me in him. It was sort of a baptism by fire, but I came out of that clinic more confident than I had ever been before, and that never really went away. All throughout this time, I was sharing him with my sister because we were both riding him sort of full time. The way that we tended to do things is we would get to the barn and we would alternate who would warm him up and then who would do the working part of the ride. Throughout that summer, I did a couple of shows on him, but my sister did the majority of the showing because it was her last summer to properly show before she went off to university. And this is where Sheik's story really shifts. So in August of 2008, at the last show of the season before my sister was going to go to university, they had a really unfortunate and scary riding accident that ultimately either resulted in that day or as a result of Sheik tearing a suspensory ligament in his right hind leg. And if you've ever dealt with or know anything about suspensory tears, they're not fun and they take a long time to rehab. So the vet suggested that we bring Sheik to the provincial clinic because they had x-rays and ultrasound machines that we simply didn't have at our local clinic. I'm gonna say it was October or November of 2008. We brought him down and finally got our answers. I was heartbroken. I wanted him to feel better. I didn't want him to be in pain. And I was really sad at the thought of him having to stay in and be on stall rest for an extended period of time. Basically, we got back from the vet. He started staying in on stall rest. He was such a good boy for stall rest. Like to this day, it still surprised me how much of an absolute legend he was. Because he could be so high strung, we were sort of dreading the stall rest and we're sort of expecting him to be a bit of a problem child. So we rehabbed him for nearly a year and went back and forth to the vet every about 2 months to get updated ultrasounds and new rehab instructions. Luckily, because we followed the rehab instructions to a T, we were always able to start steadily increasing his workload. So it started out with 20 minutes of walking every day, either in hand or on his back. Once we had gone back the second time, I think it was in January of 2009, we were allowed to start adding in some trotting, starting at 30 seconds for a few days and then adding in 30 seconds every 3 or 4 days until we got to a point where he was trotting for 5 minutes. And then we sort of followed that sort of plan throughout the next few months. By, I want to say the summer of 2009, we were able to start jumping him a little bit again. The vet was sort of expecting him to come back from that injury at maybe 75-80% of the horse he had been before, but he ultimately came back at about 90%. So he couldn't jump as high, but he actually came back more technically correct and strong, physically stronger than he had ever been before. He jumped nicer, was more consistent in the flat, and was way less spooky. So even though his injury meant that I sort of had to slow down in the advancement of my riding, I'm weirdly grateful for the opportunity that it presented me because it was such an intense bonding experience for Sheik and I. It's sort of similar to how my relationship with Merlin changed a lot in the wake of his OCD surgery because by necessity I was spending a lot of time with him. So the recovery period of Sheik's injury proved to be a really sort of intense bonding experience for the both of us. So then 2010 came and this was really my year to take Sheik to a bunch of shows. So I did some schooling shows at one of the local venues. It was the year that I finally got to show him over fences at a decent height, about 2'6". After his accident, we never really jumped him over 2'6" out of caution. And yeah, we went to a few outings and spent the summer just really having fun before I started high school. 2011 came and this was a really bittersweet year because this was the year that we ultimately made the decision to put Sheik up for sale. A lot of thought went into that decision. The deal always was that my parents would help to pay for horses until I went off to university, and then rightly so, any horse that we had would have to be sold so that they could start saving for retirement, which, you know, is a thing that is nice for people to be able to do. And even though I still had a couple of years before I went off to university, we made the decision to put him up for sale in 2011 because of a variety of reasons. The first was that he was 18 at the time, and if we waited to sell him until I went off to university, he would be 21. And it's a lot easier to sell an 18-year-old horse who still has a good few years of riding left in him for as a lesson horse or a step-up mount for a younger person looking to gain some confidence than it is to sell a 21-year-old horse. Another reason we made the choice to sell him was just that I had the opportunity to lease a really incredible mare and to do some shows on her, and it was a logical sort of next step. So I think we posted him for sale in the spring, and then he ultimately sold in the middle of July of 2011 to a home where he was meant to be a light school horse and the lady's personal trail horse. So in the months before we sold him, we just had fun. I took him on a lot of hacks. he ultimately left for his new home on July 11th, 2011. So as I mentioned earlier, the main thing that I can really credit Sheik with giving me was my confidence as a rider. For me, he certainly wasn't an easy ride at first, but I also was obsessed with him and I loved him so much and I was determined to conquer those fears. And I got to a point where with time and a very, very incredible and patient coach and that one clinic where I sort of got over my fear and I stopped being scared at the spooks, started laughing at them. That confidence has carried forward into every single horse I've ever ridden since. Since him, I've never really been scared by spooking or bucking, anything like that. Another thing that I learned from him at the time was that it's the tougher horses who make you a better rider. I think you get to a point when you're a young rider where there's a transitional period between you moving up from the sort of easier lesson/school ponies to moving up to maybe a lease horse or a horse of your own that challenges you a little more. And while those lesson ponies really gave me a great foundation of the basics, Sheik is the one who taught me how to problem solve, and also the fact that every day you should give a horse a blank slate, that you might have a different horse one day that you will the next day. So in reflecting on previous horsemanship practices, I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that I've realized about Sheik in hindsight. So the main thing I've realized is that his level of spookiness and flight responses was likely, and not likely, was exacerbated by my nerves and my energy, and that quite unfairly he had a lot of labels placed on him like crazy Arabian that he didn't quite deserve. He wasn't a crazy Arabian. He was a highly sensitive and emotionally intelligent animal who was very in tune with his rider's energy. So rightly so, when I was nervous, he would feed on that and would say, oh, she's telling me that there's something to be nervous about, so I need to spook, I need to be scared. But in the same vein, when I was confident, he was so confident and bold. Another thing that I sort of realized about Sheik in hindsight is that just in general, horses have more patience or grit or strength than we sometimes give them credit for. And one particular story comes to mind. I don't even remember if this was before or after his injury. That's how terrible my memory is. There was one winter in particular when Sheik started to bolt out of nowhere. Like, we'd be going along, cantering normally, and then he would just take off. And we did have a vet out to look at him, but they didn't find anything. So our reaction with consultation with professionals was to bit up. We went from a snaffle bit to a happy mouth Pelham bit. But in hindsight, knowing what I know now about what we would eventually find out, this is sort of my one regret the entire time that we had Sheik. A couple of months after we bit it up, there was a day where he was drooling and he was like quitting his food, which is not a great sign. So we had the vet out for like an emergency call to come look at him. He had had his teeth done somewhat recently, but he found a couple of sharp points. He filed them down and was like, hey, you should be good to go. I don't really see anything else. And then the vet left, and not even 30 minutes later, he was drooling again. So the vet came out again and took a closer look inside his mouth. And to this day, I still don't know how they missed it, because they had been looking like in his mouth. There was a stick, like a branch sort of, stuck in between his teeth, pressed up against the roof of his mouth, and it had evidently been there for a while, and it sort of explained why he was bolting. It was him trying to tell us, I'm in pain. So yeah, I look back at that and I do feel a lot of regret, because our reaction to him trying to tell us that he was in pain was to add a bit that would cause more pain. And I have to give myself and my family a bit of credit. We were doing what the professionals were telling us to do. I think as amateur equestrians, we rely a lot on the expertise of other people. And the vet told us that there was nothing wrong. We thought it was just a behavior issue, but as I've come to learn, no behavior is without cause. And a lot of times the cause of what we might perceive as negative or disrespectful behavior is actually the result of pain or discomfort, or the horse trying to tell us something. And whenever I think too hard about the fact that we added a bit that caused a lot of leverage and discomfort that would press up against the branch and cause him pain in his mouth whenever I would pull. If I think about it too hard, I start to cry. Something that I learned from that is definitely to listen to horses when they're trying to tell us something. If they start exhibiting odd behavior out of the blue that they've never done before, it's probably for a reason. And the minute that the vet removed the branch and he had had a bit of time to heal from it, because obviously it being up there had caused some tenderness against the top of his palate and sort of the gums in between his teeth, he went right back to normal, and we were able to go back to using the snaffle bit that we had been using before. So Sheik is now 29 years old. I don't actually remember if I said it earlier, but he was born on April 29th, 1993, which means that he's going to be 30 in 8 months. After we sold him in 2011, he remained with his new owner for 2 years before being sold on, and we were quite upset that he was being sold because it was meant to be a forever home, but ultimately we're really happy that he was sold because he's ended up in what is his proper forever home, and he is so deeply loved. They've owned him now 9 years, nearly 10 years. He looks incredible. From what I've heard, the last few winters have been quite tough for him, and he's starting to lose teeth, so is finding eating hay and hard feed more difficult, but he's still doing pretty well. I've been lucky enough that over the years since we've sold him, I've been able to go see him and even ride him a few times. The last time I saw him was in the summer of 2019, where I had what I didn't know was one final ride on him. As time goes on, I'm recognizant of the fact that he is 29 and don't know how much longer he's going to still be around. One of the reasons that I wanted to make this video was just for myself. Selfishly, that's like the main reason, was just so that on years to come I would have something to look back on and remember him by. I really hope that I'm able to go visit him at Christmas, and I tear up whenever I think about him having to be put down or passing away. But I'm so grateful for the time that we had, the memories that we made, all the lessons that he taught me, the extra special times that I had with him and my mom and my sister. It was a big sort of bonding experience with three of us when I was growing up and as a teenager. And most importantly, I'm just so grateful for the relationship that I had with him and all the love that we shared and that he gave me. They say that your first heart horse sticks with you, and that's definitely the case. He ended up in the best possible place that he could be, and he's definitely living the life that he deserves. So I'm gonna end this video just by adding in some pictures and videos, just a nice little thank you to him. So if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe down below, and say hi in the comments. And until next time, I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are. Make sure to give your pony a hug or a kiss the next time you see them, and I will see you next time. Bye.
Summer rain on a window. Watch the time float on. Cool air blows a memento as I fall behind. I'm so sorry for dreaming about the future. Maybe I'll be better when we're old enough. Hey, I'm sorry for dreaming about the future. You and I'll be better when we're old enough. Take apart all the good things